Now, is 2 weeks the longest running case you've ever done?
This longest single trial I've done, I've had two-week trials to juries. And I think I've had about maybe an 8-day case, about 8 business days for a civil case. That was the longest I've had for a civil case. And that was a medical malpractice case that went about 4 days one week and 4 days the next week. We try, when we have cases that we think are going to go long, we try to work the case harder in the sense of going longer into the day, because people don't get paid to be on jury service. I mean, we don't pay them that much money, and a lot of times they're taking work taking off work. So we have an obligation to try to move the case as fast as we can. But the cases also have to have their own. I mean, you got to let people call witnesses. You got to let the witnesses be examined. So there's limits to how fast we can move a case.
Okay. Okay. The next question is from Nate.
Hi, my name is Nate Holly, and I've been a Medina resident for 13 years. And my question for the judge is, how do you decide penalty when imposing a criminal sentence?
Well, to a certain extent, the punishment is oftentimes shaped by the statute. For example, there are certain offenses, murder, rape, certain kinds of rape, certain kinds of drug offenses, certain kinds of offenses involving firearms that I have to impose a prison sentence. I have no discretion. Sometimes I may have discretion as the length of time of the sentence, but I have to impose a prison sentence. But in other situations where I don't have a mandatory sentence, there are certain factors that are put out in the Ohio Revised Code by the Ohio General Assembly. And for example, you got to look at things like the impact of the crime on the victim, the nature of the offense, the background of the defendant, whether or not the defendant has committed these offenses in the past, whether or not they've shown remorse, things like that. And you apply those factors to the case in front of you to see whether or not what sentence would be appropriate. It is sometimes, I mean, there are discrepancies between how judges sentence people. I may sentence one way, Judge Collier may sentence the same crime another way. Another judge in another county may sentence a third way. But I think also what we're paid to do is to exercise our judgment as to what we think is appropriate. And you take into account the PSI, which stands for Pre-Sentence Investigation Interview, the impact of the victim. The two things I probably look at first are the impact of the victim and the nature, well, three things: the impact of the victim, the nature of the offense, and the background the person brings to the offense.
Okay.
And there's not a really good way to balance those out. I mean, for example, I've had aggravated vehicular homicide cases where I have put people in prison for killing somebody recklessly in an automobile, and they're probably never going to commit another offense again, and and oftentimes they have very good records, but the impact on the victim was horrible because the person died.
Right.
So it's not like you balance 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. It's more like you take a look at the whole mix.
Okay.
Judge, let me jump in on that one. I mean, Kate, that was Nate who asked that question?
Yes.
Nate, that's a pretty good question. I could tell you, Nate, as a practicing lawyer in Medina County, there's a number of lawyers that wonder how you come to these conclusions.
Yeah, I'm sure there are.
And I think one of the things that came up in a show that we had, another show, actually a Law Talk, we had Veronica Perry on the probation department, and she explained something called the pre-sentence, I think it was called pre-sentence investigation, which ultimately wound up with you or Judge Collier receiving a report.
Right.
Can you, that's pretty important stuff in there. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, it's a pre-sentence investigation report is about maybe a 12 to 15 page document that's presented by the probation department that gives us the social history of the defendant, the economic history, employment history, the criminal history, the impact on the victim, the previous criminal record of the defendant, the statutory criteria for imposing sentences in cases. one of the great ironies, one of the great ironies of the criminal justice system, is that although I am the person imposing the sentence, assuming there's not been a jury trial, I spend less time with that defendant than almost anybody in the system.
But you're the person who's determining
that's right.
what
but
pretty much happens to the person the rest of his life.
But I probably personally don't have that person in my presence unless there's a jury trial. If there's a jury trial, this would be much different. But I do not have that person in my actual presence for more than maybe 30 minutes.
And actually, I mean, I visited your court on numerous Thursdays, and the majority of the people that pass in front of your bench they're not jury trials.
No, that's right.
I mean,
that's right. 98, probably 95 to 98% of our criminal cases get resolved by police.
Well, the role of your probation department then, as to what you have to do, which is very, very difficult, probably one of the most difficult things anybody has to do, is judge somebody, pretty critical then.
Oh yeah, because we would not have the ability to get the information we need to impose intelligent sentences if we did not have somebody getting the information for us. There just would not be enough time in the day.
Right.
But you don't, I've noticed this, I mean, I'm making a personal observation. You actually ask a probation officer in front of you, sometimes, I mean, what do you think? I mean, you get the opinion.
Yeah.
But you don't always follow that.
That's right. Yeah, well, it's not mandatory that we follow it. I usually ask them what they think I should do more when there's been a PV, a probation violation. And, you know, I would say that probably 90% of the time I follow the recommendations of the probation department on probation violations. I would say that probably not quite that, well, maybe that. I follow the recommendations regarding incarceration or non-incarceration. But I don't always follow it. And one thing about being a probation department officer is that they seem to accept that. I mean, in other words, they understand that their role is to give us the information. What we decide to do with the information is our decision, and they're comfortable with that.
Well, ultimately, that's your job as a judge, and it's difficult. And in all fairness, having been in your courtroom, you do converse with not only the defense attorney, but oftentimes the defendant as well in this process. I've seen.
Oh yeah, defendants give an opportunity to talk with us, and oftentimes that can be very revealing. I have seen defendants in my courtroom reduce a sentence by what they tell me at the sentencing, and I've seen defendants increase a sentence by what they tell me at the sentencing.
I have too.
So it works both ways.
It's the second that generally is when I'm before you with somebody that I'm most concerned about.
Well, yeah, sure, because you don't want them, you don't want them to do something stupid.
But I mean, for the record, though, and you and I'm sure all your colleagues, I mean, everybody gets a chance to be heard before you.
That's right. Everybody has a chance to speak in mitigation. Yeah, so every attorney has a chance to speak in what's called elocution.
But the probation department does play a big role. Good question. Excellent question. Go ahead, Kate.
Okay, now I have a question from Sherry.
Hi, Judge Kimbler. My name is Sherry Patterson. I'm a longtime resident of Medina. And my question to you is, how many people do you send to prison each year?
I recently had occasion to look at the statistics for 2009, and I really don't know much before that, a number. In 2009, I sent 133 people to prison, and I probably sentenced about 325 that year. So I would say that I probably sentenced to prison about maybe 40% of those people I heard. And one reason why that figure exists is because luckily in Medina County, the way the Ohio Revised Code is set up by the General Assembly, there's a presumption that first and second degree felons will go to prison. There's a presumption that fourth and fifth degree felons will not go to prison. There's no presumption either way on third degree felons. We have 5 degrees of felonies in Ohio. So we actually in Medina County have a lot more 4 and 5s than we do 1 and 2s. Okay. So presumably, they would actually, most of our people would not be going to prison. Although there's ways that presumption can be rebutted. For example, if they have prior history, if you put them on probation for it, it hasn't worked. if they committed an act of violence against a victim, even though it's a fourth or fifth degree felony. If it's a sex case, if it's certain kind of drug cases, those can overcome the presumption that a fourth and fifth degree felon would not go to prison. But last year, in 2009, it was 133.
Okay. And just to tell everyone, first degree to fifth degree felonies in their prison sentences, how do they go?
Well, that's a good question. A fifth degree felony is 6 months to 1 year in prison maximum.
Okay.
A fourth degree felony is 6 months to 18 months. A third degree felony is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in prison. A second degree felony is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 years in prison. And a first degree felony is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in prison. But then you get into what's called unclassified offenses, like, for example, certain rapes carry a 15 to life.
Okay.
Certain sex offenses against children carry a mandatory life. Certain murder carries, depending on it could carry a death sentence, but it also carries, sometimes it carries a sentence with no parole eligibility till 21 years, or I'm sorry, 20 years or 25 years. So that's kind of a basic degree of how the prison sentences I just gave. And then you also have, like, for example, gun specs, which carry a mandatory 1 or 3 years in prison, depending on the kind of spec, violent offender spec, sexual predator specs, and these specs can be added on to the basic sentence I just described.
Okay. Okay, so next is Jen, and her question is,
Hi Judge, I'm Jen. I'm a new resident of Medina. My question is, who commits more crime, women or men?
Right now, it is more men than women committing crimes that I see. However, in the last 25 years that I have been a judge, the number of women coming through the system has increased dramatically.
Really?
And I think there's been a lot of discussion among sociologists and criminologists why that's happening. One theory is that as women have become more outside the home, you know, that they have the opportunity to commit crimes and they do things that bring them in contact with police. Another theory is that it's kind of a byproduct of the women's liberation movement, in that women who may have been given a break before by the police are no longer getting a break.
okay.
You know. But right now, I would say that if you were to, I would say that probably 2/3 of my sentence, my felons are men and 1/3 women.
Okay.
Well, Judge, we'd like to thank you, speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Celebrezze-Zangi Community Legal Education Project, for being our first judge on Ask the Judge, our brand new show. We know you have always been very gracious about coming back for productions, but we again will extend that invitation to you. We hope there are other folks out in the county that have questions on their mind that would like to ask the judge. So we thank you, Judge.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.